All right, we're continuing our discussion of African Black psychology, and I am your professor and cultural sharer, Dr. Slater Sarah. Hey, boos. We began talking about ancient Kemet and the contributions Kemet has made to science, technology, literature, architecture, and education, health, medicine, all of that. And then we began, or what we should do is continue to talk about the various different places throughout Africa that have made significant contributions and some of the dynamics. So if we think of the whole continent of Africa, if you go back a couple mini lectures, you'll see where the continent of Africa, based on what Baba Jacob Carruthers said, is the orientation is an attempt to flip Africa on its head. Also, we oftentimes don't conceptualize well the size of Africa as a continent. And so we want to look at some other places on the continent of Africa. And the first is Ghana. And Ghana was the first to emerge as a state in 300 CE. So some people actually believe or argue that people migrated from the Nile region and, to kind of settle one, to the left or to the right. But where these great empires were built came from, most people argue, came out directly out of Kemet. So Ghana reaches zenith in 900 to 1000 CE, and one of the greatest rulers was King Tunka Menin. He ruled about a 250,000 square mile territory, and Ghana then was destroyed as an empire in 1087. Mali grew out of the Ghanaian Empire, and the first ruler was King Sundiata. And Mali grew to be twice the size of Ghana, and well known in history is King Mansa Musa, who ruled from 1312 to 1332. One of the special things that Mansa Musa was able to do is build the University of Sankore at Timbuktu, which is a large university of people from all over the world came to study in Africa. And the Great Decline began in 1400 CE. What I find with my students is that people say, I didn't even know there was school in Africa or university in Africa. So the fact that this great university was established there is very important. That then takes us to Songhai. So the largest and greatest of the West African civilizations was led by King Suni Ali Bear. And he was the first ruler. He ruled for 28 years. What he did was recapture Timbuktu from Mali in 1468. So Mali was put in some serious work. King Muhammad Touré ruled from 1493 to 1529. And Askia Muhammad, or Askia the Great, built Songhai into what is known as the largest empire of its era, until it became conquered by Spanish Christians I almost said Christians like my son, in 1591. So this is a reminder that African people have been, I was going to say hitting a lick. Oh gosh, is that YouTube proper? African people have been doing great things throughout the continent of Africa, throughout antiquity. And we don't often get taught this information in schools. So it's important to know, and I always encourage you all to take a look at the features, the facial features of the rulers to see if these people look like your cousin them, your auntie, uncle them. Also, in ancient Kemet, wigs and hairstyles were worn that mirrored or mimicked or looked like those of Senegalese women and Senegalese children. We looked at a previous slide that showed hairstyles matching that of Senegalese women. So this looks kind of like, locks. And this shows a braided style and full hair with a crown. So it's important when we deal with our hair to know that it's not new. Reclaiming your roots is not new. And that comes from antiquity. A little bit more about the continent of Africa. The Sahara Desert is very hot and dry to the north. The Sahel region is sparse vegetation and rainfall, but just below the Sahara, in the Savannah region, the semi-forest and seasonal rainfall occurs there. So below the Sahel then is a forest region, which is very hot and very wet. And this is just an example of a desert region. This shows the Sahara, and then we move on down to all of the other regions. Africa is constantly used for its raw materials and natural resources. Extra credit if you are the first to drop in the chat what material the phone companies source in Africa that the phone wouldn't work if they don't get it out of Africa. Did y'all know that? Okay. So the resources trade consisted historically of gold, salt, palm products, still very much traded. There are different rivers and tributaries and smaller rivers that help with the inland water supply, such as the Ogun, Gambia, etc. Additionally, the 4 primary trade routes vital for the exchange of goods and supplies, weapons, guns, ammunition, and in older days was the enslaved Africans were these different trails. The main ethnic groups in West Africa, that way, included the Wolof, Manding, Mende, and then to the west as well, we have the Maasai, Ashanti, Fan, and Fanti. In the central region, Hausa, Yoruba, I did that backwards. All right. So to the west, we have the Wolof, Manding, and Mende. The Maasai is to the central region, Ashanti, Fan, and Fanti. And then in the eastern region, Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo. The Fulani were a nomadic group. I should have worn my earrings. Okay. So, yes, that is also giving more information. I also want to bring us back to another Kemetic woman. Look at her facial features. What auntie, cousin, uncle them does she look? Auntie, cousin them does she look like? Grandma them. Okay. So, we should always, as African people, wonder if Africa was so great. / is so great. What happened? How the African people, those who were in leadership, and so much leadership that people would come from all over to the continent of Africa to study. What is it that happened? A great scholar, which I showed in a previous mini lecture, was Chancellor Williams. He wrote the book Destruction of a Black Civilization, and he went through explaining what challenges happened that caused the downfall of the African continent comprehensively, separate from things that we are very familiar with. I'm going to come back to this, including the slave trade, which could be rape, pillage, violence, encroachment on Africa, developed the preconditions for things like famine and starvation challenges. But in order for them to enslave African people first, they had to come in and try to conquer and bring war. So 3,500 years it took Eurasians to conquer Africa, and they were relentless and consistent in their effort to conquer Africa. Also, racism and Africa's physiography oftentimes made it challenging for African people to survive depending on the location in the region. So we would look at all of these 4 criteria that Chancellor Williams identified in Destruction of a Black Civilization. There's a reason why, after thousands and thousands and thousands of years of attack and attempted conquest, why Africa, it no longer holds the position of power that it formerly did. And some would argue some other factors, but primarily in 1976, the work of Chancellor Williams was dynamic and very important. So this is another picture of Pharaoh in the 12th dynasty. I will say again, look at the face and see what Uncle Nim they look like. But also, you'll see here where Pharaoh Ramses on this side. Sorry, it's not. I don't know if I can rotate it. Oh wait, let me see if I can do it. But anyway, Pharaoh Ramses looks like. Okay, Ramses has a modern hair style or helmet, and this particular dude, you can see the coils inside the helmet here. Maybe put the pointer back, which is very similar to the curls, coils, and style of this Watutsi, which is almost exact in terms of structure. The facial features smidgy different, but they mirror each other, and that's very important to note, that African people are African people wherever we are, and identify the carryover from the even the hair styles of hair. So this just a couple other pictures to close out this component, which is very important for us to understand. Once we are clear what happened in Africa, the effort to erase Africa's contribution to the world, then note the carryover in all the various different cultures. We can then evaluate why the evolution of African Black psychology is so important and significant. First, we identified the significance of the reascension of African Black psychology, meaning the African Black psychology has been in existence from the beginning of time. But more importantly, in ancient Kemet, between 4 and 5000 BCE, the Kemetic scholars studied the soul and the spirit, which is equivalent to the American mind based on African cosmology, in that ancient Nile Valley temple areas. So the reascension of African Black psychology kind of came about when African scholars began to study ancient Kemet, and scholars began to emerge after Western training and began to look into and at the importance and significance of African Black psychology. So in 1909, Gilbert Jones received a PhD in psychology from the University of Jena in Germany. Jena. In 1920, Francis Sumner, important person in psychology, received a PhD in psychology from Clark University. Herman Kennedy organized the Department of Psychology. In 1968, this should be very important note, was a founding of the Association of Black Psychologists. And to hear the different people, but Baba Wade Nobles, tell the story, so intriguing about how it all unfolded. Very interesting how the Association of Black Psychologists emerged to address the needs of African people that were not being addressed at the time. Joseph White published Toward a Black Psychology in the 1970s. In 1972, Reginald Jones published a book called Black Psychology, and later on, in the book, Baba Wade Nobles wrote an article, African Philosophy, Foundations for African Black Psychology. So all of this is very significant in terms of the historical evolution of African Black psychology. And we say African Black for a reason. We'll talk about that later. But it's important to note the significance and importance of African Black psychology for African people to reclaim their African minds. Thank you. That concludes our mini lecture and another section in some components of chapter 1, I think. We'll be back when we begin our journey in chapter 2. Y'all be good now.